Good morning, all. I am Ranjita and I am from first year MN. Today, I will be dealing with stages of sampling. Okay, as all of us know, sampling is a crucial step in the context of research. It's very important for a researcher and an investigator. The selection of sample is a crucial research decision, and the process of sampling involves certain stages. These stages are also known as sample design. What? Sample design. Sample design is a specific plan for obtaining a sample from a given population. It refers to the technique or procedure the researcher would adopt in selecting items for the sample. It is the responsibility of the investigator to make sure of the reliability, appropriateness, and authenticity of the sample design. We have already discussed sample design. Now, let's have a look at the characteristics of a good sample design. A good sample design should have certain characteristics. The sample design must result in truly representative sample. Sample design must have small sampling error. The given sample design must be viable in the context of budget availability. Sample design must be such so that systematic bias can be controlled. Sample should be such that the results of the study can be general with a reasonable level of confidence. Now, let's have a look at target population and accessible population. The first step in the sampling process is to identify the target population. The target population refers to the large group of individuals or elements that the researcher wishes to generalize the results of the study to. In other words, it is the population that the researcher is interested in learning about or describing. And an example is teachers in the Jawahar Navodaya Vidyalaya Samiti. For instance, if a researcher is interested in learning about the teachers in the Jawahar Navodaya Vidyalaya Samiti system, all the teachers who teach within the system would constitute the target population. And now let's move on to the second example, that is Indian adolescents. If a researcher is interested in studying the attitudes and values of Indian adolescents, the target population would be all Indian boys and girls in the age range of 10 to 19 years, assuming that adolescence is operationally defined as the period between ages 10 and 19 years. Now, let's make a distinction between target population and accessible population. It is essential to distinguish between the target population and the accessible population. The accessible population refers to the population of subjects that are accessible to the researcher for drawing a sample. In most research studies, researchers deal with accessible populations rather than target population. For example, sampling Indian adolescents. It would be expensive and time consuming to sample from the total population of Indian adolescents, right? However, a researcher could draw a sample of adolescents from one state. In this case, the accessible population would be the adolescents from that particular state, and the researcher could only generalize the results to adolescents in that state, not to all Indian adolescents. Okay. So I have already given a picture representing population and sample. How the sample is driven from the population. Now pictorial representation of a sample where there is sample clearly the population, then we have to derive the sampling frame, and finally the sample will be obtained from the given population. That is what accessible population. So in population, you can it's all about target population. In the sampling frame, part of the target population which is accessible, and finally sample which contains actual units under the study. So the very first step is defining the target population. We have already provided the examples. That is, if we are aiming to study Indian adolescents, it's not possible to study the entire group of Indian adolescents. For that purpose, we are choosing the target population, that is adolescents of a particular X state. Okay, an accessible population will be the people who are ready to respond, or whose response can be obtained, will be under the accessible population. The next step is selecting the sampling frame. Once the population has been identified, the next step is to select the sampling frame. A sample frame is drawn from the target population. A sampling frame is a list of the actual cases from which sample will be drawn. Thus, the sampling frame must be representative of the population. In brief, sampling frame is a list of all the items in the population. Now, the next step is choosing the appropriate sampling technique. In general, sampling techniques can be divided into what probability sampling and non-probability sampling. The picture is already given. Probability sampling involves selecting a sample in which the elements are drawn by chance procedures. The main characteristics of probability sampling is that every member or element of the population has a non-probability of being chosen in the sample. This type of sampling is also known as what? Random sampling. Probability sampling is also known as random sampling. Now let's move on to non-probability sampling. Non-probability sampling, on the other hand, includes methods of selection in which elements are not chosen by chance procedures. The success of non-probability sampling depends on the knowledge, expertise, and judgment of the researcher. Non-probability sampling is used when the application of probability sampling is not feasible. Its advantages include convenience and economy. Now, the next step is determining the sample size. After selecting the sample technique, the investigator must determine the sample size. The researcher should also consider factors like desired precision, confidence level, population variance, and budget constraints. So, sample size also plays a pivotal role in determining the effectiveness and accuracy of research. Bigger the sample size, precision will be also higher. But budget constraints are also a problem, because when you are obviously selecting a big sample, the financial expenditure or the expenditure for the sample will also increase. So we have to consider budget constraints along with the sample size. Now, field work and data collection. Once the target population, sampling frame, sampling technique, and sample size have been established, the next step is to conduct field work and collect data. We have to be very careful in this step as well. data collection and fieldwork is also important, and we have to also make sure that the data that we collect is precise, and we also have to give more uh, attention to the respondents as well. And there are so many data collection methods like observation method, surveys, and then questionnaires. All these are important when it comes to research. So data collection and fieldwork is also important. And the sampling process wouldn't end there. We have to assess the response rate. Okay. Response rate is the number of cases agreeing to take part in the study. These cases are taken from original sample. In reality, most researchers never achieve a 100% response rate, right? It's not possible. It's impossible to achieve a 100% response rate. Reasons for this might include refusal to respond, ineligibility to respond, inability to respond, or the respondent has been located but the researchers are unable to make a contact. In sum, response rate is important because each non response is liable to bias the final sample. So, we have discussed so many things, steps in sampling. What is the significance of sampling? What is target population? What is accessible population? What are the steps? What is sample design? What are the sampling techniques? What is sampling frame? We have looked at the pictorial representations. So, I hope the idea is clear. Uh, we have to practice sampling in real life as well to to get a clear view. To actually we have to do the sampling. That is how we are going to familiarize with it, with the procedures. And research also, like I would like to repeat it, that the investigator or the researcher should pay in, attention to the sampling and make sure that the sampling frame and the sampling design is appropriate and precise. That's all. Thank you for listening. Thank you.